Something felt wrong the moment the suitcase touched the riverbank, not because of its weight or its shape, but because it should never have existed at all. Inside it lay a secret so dark, so violently hidden, that the city of Bristol would soon wake to one of the most disturbing murder cases in modern British history. Only a few days earlier, the world believed Paul Longworth and Albert Alfonso were living quietly in their sunlit shepherd's bush flat, two men in love, two men with plans, two men who never imagined their lives would be taken from them by someone they trusted. But behind their painted front door, a stranger had stepped in, a handsome, charismatic visitor, a rising OnlyFans model whose smile masked a hunger so cold it could freeze the air around him. His name was Yostin Andrés Mosquera. Neighbors remembered him as polite and mysterious, the kind of man who moved like he knew he was being watched and enjoyed every second of it. He arrived as a guest, he stayed as a friend. And slowly, carefully, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every step, he prepared to become something else entirely. Yet even then, before anyone knew what was coming, small warnings floated through the air like dust particles catching light. A strange smell one afternoon, unusual thuds at impossible hours, and a silence in the hallway where there used to be laughter. Shepherd's Bush was a neighborhood built on routine. People knew the rhythm of life there. They knew when the postman arrived. They knew who left early for work. And they knew that Paul and Albert never went anywhere without telling their closest friends. So when July 2024 arrived, and both men suddenly vanished, an uncomfortable tension settled like fog over the building. Windows were left open, lights stayed on for days, and behind the curtains of Flat 42, no one seemed to be living at all. Yet, quietly, in the middle of this growing unease, CCTV cameras had captured a man moving in and out of the apartment. A man carrying bags he struggled to lift. A man wiping door handles with trembling hands. A man who never looked up at the cameras because he already knew they were there. Inside the flat, the air was still, heavy, and unnaturally cold. Police would later describe it as the kind of chill that stays trapped in walls long after the crime is gone. But for now, no one was inside to feel it. What no neighbor could see was that Mosquera had been planning this long before the first blow was struck. Late night Google searches filled his phone like confessions written in digital ink. How to kill someone quietly, how to hide a body, how long decomposition takes in a suitcase, and the most telling of all, how much is a flat in Shepherd's Bush worth? It wasn't a sudden burst of violence. It wasn't a moment of rage. It was strategy, cold, calculated strategy. He wanted their money. He wanted their life. And he wanted their deaths to vanish as neatly as he believed he could wipe fingerprints off a kitchen counter. But the walls of crime always crack somewhere. The first crack came from a neighbor across the hall, who had grown uneasy after days of hearing nothing but static silence, no footsteps, no music, no soft hum of the kettle being switched on. Just stillness. Then, one night, she heard something that made her heart contract, a dragging sound, slow, uneven, heavy, followed by the faint metallic click of a suitcase zipper being pulled closed. She didn't know then that she had just heard the burial of two men who had once shared Sunday breakfasts and vacations in Spain. She didn't know she had heard the beginning of a plan spiraling out of control. By the time Mosquera wheeled the suitcases out of the building, his face remained calm, almost detached, as if he were simply disposing of old clothes. CCTV captured the moment he paused at the exit, took a breath, and then disappeared into the London night. The next morning, a missing person report finally triggered what Mosquera never expected. His timeline was collapsing. People were asking questions, and detectives were already on their way. Meanwhile, along the banks of the river Avon in Bristol, a fisherman spotted something unnatural lodged in the mud, a suitcase, taped, weighted, and seeping. What he found inside would tear open the quiet illusion of Shepherd's Bush and expose a secret so grotesque that even seasoned investigators froze. The remains of a man, cut, compressed, and left to disappear beneath the water. Across the city, another suitcase would soon be found near the Clifton suspension bridge. This one held the second man, 2 lives, 2 suitcases, 1 killer. Detectives now had fragments of a story bleeding to the surface, but no clear face behind the horror. Not yet. As the investigation unfolded, police began collecting CCTV timelines, digital footprints, and forensic traces left behind like breadcrumbs in a forest of lies. They didn't know they were following the shadow of an OnlyFans model who believed he was too clever to be caught. They didn't know that inside the victim's flat, a meticulously crafted cover-up waited to be torn apart by the smallest mistake. And they didn't know that Mosquera himself had already made it. A single fingerprint, a single drop of blood, a single camera angle he failed to anticipate. Somewhere in the evidence, the answer was waiting. But the final twist in Chapter 1 came not from the flat, not from the suitcases, and not from the victims. It came from Mosquera's phone. Investigators unlocked it and found the searches, the plans, the curiosity of a man thinking like a predator long before the attack. And in the middle of those searches sat one chilling entry that made detectives stop breathing. How long does it take police to track a killer? The real story was only just beginning, and the truth behind his smile was darker than anyone imagined. Investigators stared at the glowing phone screen as the final search phrase sank in. How long does it take police to track a killer? It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity, and that made everything far more terrifying. The discovery shifted the energy inside the incident room. This was no impulsive crime. This was a blueprint, a timeline crafted by someone who believed he understood the rules well enough to bend them. Detectives began reconstructing the days leading up to the murders. What they found was a pattern as cold as steel. Mosquera had lingered in the victim's flat longer than any visitor should. He studied their routines, their arguments, their bank notifications, even the layout of their bedroom. He learned their vulnerabilities the way a surgeon studies anatomy, and then he struck. But timing mattered, motive mattered, so investigators dove deeper, pulling bank statements, tracing Wi-Fi activity, and cross-referencing every piece of CCTV they could find. Piece by piece, Mosquera's double life began to surface. Online, he was a rising adult content creator, admired for his physique, his charm, his seductive confidence. But offline, he was spiraling through money problems, craving luxury he couldn't afford, and searching for someone to finance the lifestyle he believed he deserved. When Paul and Albert welcomed him into their home, they unknowingly opened the door to a man chasing a fantasy he intended to fund with blood. The timeline revealed an unsettling detail. Right after the estimated time of death, Mosquera stayed inside the flat for hours. Not in panic, not in distress, but moving with an eerie calm. He cleaned, he organized, he even sat on the sofa and scrolled through his phone. Forensic investigators later found faint touch patterns on the victim's devices, confirming he explored their banking apps while their bodies lay nearby. This was not loss of control. This was ambition. Outside the flat, neighbors began reporting an odor drifting through the hallway. The building manager scheduled a welfare check. Detectives realized that Mosquera had been minutes away from being discovered that day. Minutes, so he escalated the plan. He purchased large suitcases from a West London shop. He bought cleaning chemicals. He bought disposable gloves. He even Googled how to fit a human body into a suitcase, a query that later made jurors physically recoil when read aloud in court. CCTV footage captured him hauling the heavy suitcases out of the building. His shoulders strained, his steps slowed, but he never once looked behind him. Investigators analyzed those recordings frame by frame. They matched clothing threads to fibers found in the victim's flat. They matched the wheel marks of the suitcase to streaks on the hallway floor. Every detail pulled the noose tighter. Still, they needed certainty. They needed the turning point. That moment arrived when detectives reviewed cell tower data. Mosquera's phone pinged near the Clifton suspension bridge at the same time one of the suitcases was dumped there. A second ping placed him by the river Avon only hours later. He was no longer a suspect. He was the only suspect. But even as the evidence mounted, a deeper, more chilling layer began to emerge, something investigators initially overlooked. While Mosquera cleaned, dragged, and disposed of the bodies, he also took photographs, not for panic, not for memory, but as trophies. Forensic analysts recovered deleted files from his devices, images of the victims' bodies in the flat, images of the crime seen as he arranged it, images that showed the deliberate progression of a man documenting his own violence. One detective described it as the moment the case shifted from murder to something far darker: sadism, control, ownership. While digital experts worked through the recovered data, another team focused on eyewitness accounts. A taxi driver stepped forward, recalling a late-night passenger who loaded a strangely heavy suitcase into his car. The passenger avoided conversation. He kept his phone screen tilted away. He stared out the window like he had already left the city behind. That passenger was Mosquera. The taxi dropped him near the river, where he struggled to lift the suitcase out of the trunk. The driver watched, uneasy, but unaware he had witnessed the disposal of a victim. Every statement, every file, every camera angle built toward a single terrifying truth: Paul and Albert never stood a chance. But the case twisted again when investigators uncovered a financial trail. During the days the couple was already dead, someone attempted transfers from their banking accounts, amounts that escalated each attempt. And behind those attempts was a device using their Wi-Fi, a device belonging to Mosquera. He had planned not only their deaths, but also a future living off their savings, their home, their credit cards. He had searched the value of the flat because he intended to make it his own, but his plan unraveled the moment he left London. He believed Bristol was far enough away. He believed the currents would carry the evidence away. He believed the suitcases would sink. They did not. While investigators pieced the case together, Mosquera's behavior grew stranger. He attended gyms. He posted online. He walked through the city with a practiced calm, as though the world could never touch him. But something was cracking beneath that mask. When authorities finally located him, he was surprisingly composed, not defensive, not panicked, almost fascinated by the attention. But fascination evaporates when truth closes in. Within hours of his arrest, forensic teams raided the flat. The smell of bleach hit them first, then the uneven streaks on the floor that revealed where furniture had been moved, then the faint traces of blood beneath the bathtub sealant. Each new discovery cut through the last fragment of Mosquera's lie. Yet the final twist of Chapter 2 did not come from blood, or from bank statements, or from CCTV. It came from a small metal drain cover behind the building. Inside it, forensic teams found shreds of clothing fibers, the same fibers that matched the victims' final outfits, shredded, burned, stuffed into the drain in a desperate attempt to erase the last physical traces of the crime. And then, deep in the pipe, they found something else, a gold ring, bent, scratched, and unmistakably belonging to one of the victims. His mistake was tiny, but it was enough. By evening, prosecutors had what they needed. Not suspicion, not theory. A case so airtight it felt like the evidence itself was demanding justice. As detectives closed the evidence folder that night, one chilling question lingered in the room. What would Mosquera do when he realized his story was finally collapsing? The interrogation room felt colder than the corridors outside, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the presence sitting silently at the table. Yostin Andrés Mosquera leaned forward with the stillness of someone calculating every breath, every gesture, every angle. He did not tremble. He did not ask questions. He simply stared at the detectives, as though he were waiting to see which piece of evidence they would reveal first. But they were no longer dealing with a clever predator. They were dealing with a man whose empire of lies had begun crumbling the moment that gold ring surfaced from the drain. Detectives placed a binder on the table, thick enough to echo. Inside it lived the story of everything Mosquera believed he had erased. CCTV captures, bank traces, Google searches, suitcase fibers, drain debris, and a timeline stitched so tightly that even he could not slip through its seams. At first, Mosquera tried to lean on silence. Silence had helped him manipulate, seduce, and deceive. Silence had made him seem mysterious online. Silence had convinced people he had depth. But silence collapses under truth, and the truth began unfolding piece by piece. Investigators presented the CCTV footage of him dragging the suitcases. He blinked, but his face stayed still. They showed the cell tower pings placing him at both dump sites. He looked away, only briefly. Then they revealed the recovered deleted photos from his devices, images he believed were gone forever. His jaw tightened, his breathing changed, and for the first time since his arrest, something cracked through his expression. Not guilt, not regret, annoyance, like a child caught after breaking something he wanted to keep. Detectives understood the psychology instantly. Mosquera did not feel remorse. He felt inconvenience. But the final blow did not come from evidence. It came from a detail so small, so poetic in its irony, that it became the turning point of the entire case. Forensic analysts had located faint blood traces beneath the new coat of paint Mosquera had applied on the living room wall. A patch he had painted too quickly, too unevenly, and without waiting for it to dry before moving furniture back. The wall itself had become a witness. It told the story through microscopic droplets. Droplets that formed an impact pattern consistent with blunt force trauma. Droplets that spoke louder than words ever could. With that revelation, the prosecution's narrative became unbreakable. 2 men murdered in their own home. 2 bodies dismembered and transported across city lines. A financial motive, a psychological motive, and a killer who documented his own cruelty like a portfolio. When court proceedings began, the public entered with shock and left with horror. Journalists called him the suitcase killer. Commentators dissected every detail of his digital footprint. Image creators who once admired him online now recoiled from the monster hiding behind the lens. Inside the courtroom, Mosquera entered with the same confident stride he used on camera. But each step echoed differently here. These floors did not admire him. These walls did not applaud him. And these seats did not belong to fans. As prosecutors presented the evidence, the silence inside the room turned suffocating. Photos of the suitcases, maps of the disposal sites, the timeline drawn hour by hour, the Google searches that revealed a mind studying murder like a craft. When the deleted images were shown, a few jurors looked away. The brutality was undeniable, deliberate, methodical, soulless, yet Mosquera sat expressionless, as if watching someone else's story. The defense attempted to argue panic. Loss of control, a moment of fear. But fear does not buy cleaning supplies. Fear does not test banking passwords. Fear does not rent taxis at midnight or research decomposition inside luggage. Fear does not Google how to make a murder look like an accident. Every attempt to soften his image only sharpened the truth. The turning point came when detectives described finding the ring in the drain, a symbol of love reduced to a fragment of evidence, a detail so simple yet so devastating in the narrative. It was the ring that reminded everyone this case was not about clever deception or digital footprints. It was about two men who never saw the violence coming, two men who trusted someone who studied them like prey, two men who deserved far better than the fate they endured. When the verdict was read, the courtroom felt heavier than before. Life imprisonment, a sentence that removed Mosquera from the world he had manipulated so easily. There was no outburst, no denial, no final performance, just a long, bitter exhale that echoed across the room like the last breath of a collapsing lie. But justice did not end in the courtroom. News of the sentencing rippled across social media. Former subscribers deleted their accounts. Content creators condemned the brutality. People who once praised his beauty now saw the emptiness behind it. It was poetic. A man who had spent his life chasing attention now received the wrong kind in suffocating abundance. A man who crafted his identity online now had it rewritten permanently by his own actions. A man who believed he understood power now learned what true power looked like. Power was not in manipulation. Power was not in seduction. Power was not in violence. Power was in truth. Power was in evidence. Power was in justice, and justice had arrived. The victims' families received answers, but never closure. No sentence can replace a life taken so violently. No verdict can remove the memory of what happened inside that quiet shepherd's bush flat. But truth has a strange way of healing the fractures left behind. With Mosquera behind bars, the story finally felt complete. Not clean, not fair, but complete. The final scene of this tragic film unfolded as detectives walked out of the courtroom, their hands full of binders and evidence bags. The summer sun, outside, felt too bright for the darkness they had just closed. One officer paused before stepping into the daylight. He looked down at the case file one last time, at the photos, at the timelines, at the search histories at the ring. He closed it gently. Then he spoke to no one in particular, but to the story itself. Evil hides in many forms, but it never hides forever. And with that final thought, the case of the suitcase killer came to an end. Just like the closing shot of a movie, the door of the courthouse swung shut, leaving behind one truth etched permanently into the story of modern British crime. Justice found him, and justice did not miss.